Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. Hey listeners, welcome back to another episode of Extrology. Today we have a truly special guest with us, Connie Moser, the CEO of Navenio. Connie has been a cornerstone in the healthcare technology industry. Before taking the helm at Navenio, she led teams at Verge Health, Rise Health, and had a long stint at McKesson, which is a Fortune 500 company. From Chicago to Oxford, her career has been a blend of innovative tech solutions and effective management strategies in healthcare. At Navenio, she's working on cutting-edge tech solutions aimed at transforming healthcare delivery. So, whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a healthcare professional, or someone who's keen on personal growth and technology, you're in for a treat today. Let's dive right in. Without further ado, let's get into it. Connie Moser, welcome to the Extrology podcast. Great to have you as my guest here today, and I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into a multitude of fascinating topics. But I think my first question, I'd like, if I may, to ask you about your childhood and for context for listeners, perhaps to understand a little about where you grew up and what maybe were some of your fondest memories from that time.
Oh, wow. I grew up in and around Chicagoland. And my fondest memories were my grandfather came over on a boat, and he was a preemie. He actually came over on a boat in 1908, came through Ellis Island in a cigar box. That's how stubborn and strong my family roots are.
So it's literally in a cigar box?
Literally in a cigar box.
My goodness.
And survived. And we settled in Wilmette, Illinois, which is a northern suburb of Chicago. And my fondest memories are walking around Wilmette and having my first, second, and third cousins all around me, because we all came over from in and around Trier, Germany. So having family all over was important, and it was very, very cool. The fondest thing as I grew up, the thing I treasure most is practical learnings, right? I was a first generation college student and one of the first in my entire extended family to go to college. And those practical learnings of standing up and putting your boots on and just get going, and being taught those by my family and extended family was a pretty cool environment to grow up in.
And that those influences, if you like, were there role models perhaps or inspirations growing up, and how maybe did they impact your life?
Yeah, I have two huge role models. I might actually get emotional about these role models, but my mother is a huge role model for me because we grew up for a portion of my time as a single head of family, and she had 5 children and survived it. And anyone that can survive 5 children by themselves is a strong character, and she maintained that strong character throughout. So I'm very blessed by still having her around and the things she taught me as I grew up. The second one I would say is my stepfather. God rest his soul. He is no longer with me, but he taught me business. He taught me practical approach to entering the workforce. He joined me when I was a really stubborn, hard-headed teenager. So you can imagine what he had to put up with, right? And he did it gracefully and with joy, and is one of my best friends. I still speak to him occasionally to help me through a day when I have a hard day. So
that's fantastic. I'm struck by two things. One, practical has been a consistent turn of phrase that you've used there. We'll come back to that practical learning, practical application of your experiences, but also I think the role of your mother. What do you think you've learned from her? What have you role modeled from her? What have you applied from her, do you think?
Yeah, hard work. I won't say I'm the smartest person in the world, but I am persistent and I work as hard or harder and do not ask anyone to do anything I would not do myself as a leader, right? So that persistence and that work ethic and the grace she brought to life and the love that she showed didn't matter who it was. Everyone became a friend and part of the family. And that helps with approaching diversity in the workforce. And I don't mean diversity necessarily just exclusively around race or gender or religion or whatever it is. It's diversity of thought, right? Diversity of character and how you approach that person or that individual on a daily basis. And that's a lot of work getting to that and continually maintaining that. Sometimes you're good at it. Some days it's like writing and speaking, right? And sometimes you fail and you have to look at it and rework. And so my mother taught me a lot of those, again, practical approaches to work.
I think you make a really interesting point around diversity of thought. I was listening yesterday to a podcast, which was an interview with Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's spending some time in Europe currently. I think he's got a book out, but he's certainly doing a series of speaking engagements. And he was on a podcast that is the number one podcast here in the UK called The Rest is Politics. And he was talking about what he sees as, and I don't want to quote him out of turn, but what he was talking about as to the polarization in US politics. And he was talking about when he was made governor of California and that his chief of staff, and he's of course a Republican, which you would know, and that was for the benefit of listeners rather than my American guest here. But certainly he's a Republican, but that he'd chosen as his chief of staff a Democrat and was scolded in many ways by those within his party. You couldn't possibly do that. She's one of the other side. And actually, he'd made reference to the fact that he wasn't going to be told who he could pick, but that also he felt it was critically important in any leadership role that you had diversity of experience and thought around you, so you didn't end up in an echo chamber of that sort of confirmation bias around constantly receiving the same point of view. And I think that's a really interesting point you make around diversity of thought within your own leadership style.
So totally agree. And such an Abraham Lincoln thing to do for him to do, right? And, when you're a young manager, a young leader, you think you want everyone to be like you because you think you will get more done. And in effect, through hard learnings, you realize that diversity of thought brings you greater growth. The debate, the conversation brings you greater growth because you may have a C+ idea that turns into an A idea with that diversity of thought, and being able to accept that diversity of thought as you go through and massage that idea. Or it's a completely different idea that somebody else brings to the table that that is a way better idea than the idea I thought of, right? So it's something you have to learn and continually work at, but boy, is it worth it in terms of company growth, in terms of personal and individual growth.
Before we then, I went off on a little bit of a tangent because I was really intrigued by your thought. And we're certainly going to talk a lot around career and leadership and the experiences that you've enjoyed in the workplace. But what about away from the workplace? I'm interested in perhaps those books or movies or music that might have had a profound influence on you and maybe why.
Well, I'm constantly reading. I'm reading a book about sales leadership. And for the life of me, I cannot remember the name right now, but I always read the book. I read so many books, I cannot remember the names, but it talks about the understanding of who you are speaking to, right? So walking through, and I can get you the name of the book,
We'll put it in the show notes. It'd be great. Yeah.
Yes, walking through what their challenges are. So take a hospital, for instance, since that's our primary market right now, or a health system in the US. You can understand very easily where their margins are, what their struggles are, because they're probably in the press, good and not so good, right? Then you can go on LinkedIn and get perspective on individuals. You can go through articles that talk about where they're innovating or where they are working with the workforce about back or labor shortages, etc. So you can learn a lot. And this book talks about those learnings and going with that first. A lot of people, when they go in to sell a software solution, talk all about the solution and the value it's going to provide. But if it misses the mark on the top three things that this health system or hospital is concerned about at this particular point in time, you've missed the mark. You haven't hit the personalization of that effort, right? So that's critically important. And you've got to work on that every day. But there is so much information available. I would say if you don't do that, shame on you. If I don't do that, shame on me for not preparing appropriately. And that's what it talks about. As a main theme throughout this book is the preparation of that effort as you're interacting with the individual. When I meet people on a personal level, I don't say a lot. People would call me an introvert in that regard, but I observe because I'm observing what they're interested in because I don't know, right? And I'm not going to go and stalk them on Facebook. I'm not going to go research them. I'm going to observe and then interact with them on a personal level because it broadens my understanding and it broadens and deepens the relationship you enter into.
Is that innate curiosity, I guess, as to people, something that has developed as a consequence of through your career, if you like, or has it always been an inherent part of who you are?
I would say it's both. My mother welcomed anyone into our home. My father, my stepfather, my stepmother, they all welcomed anyone into their home, no matter what, without any thoughts or concerns that person was coming into their home. So it is innate in or experiential in my upbringing, but it also is something you constantly have to work at. As I said earlier, it's like speaking and writing. It's individual interaction, personal interaction is something you have to work at constantly. So I would say it's sharpened, but some days, again, may not be as good as other days. Some days you might be in the zone, right? So,
what about milestones? Perhaps could you walk us through some of the major milestones or maybe turning points in your life or your career?
yeah, I'll never forget. I graduated as a triple major in 4 years from college, first generation, and it was back in the 80s. I will give an indication of how long ago that was. And I was asked how fast I typed, did I have a serious boyfriend, and was I getting married soon? Now, all of those questions are illegal, right?
These
Thank
would be
goodness.
interview questions, right? When going for a job, these would be typical interview questions.
Absolutely. And I was shocked, amazed, hurt, angered as I walked out of those interviews. But you know what? That persistence, that innate, call it stubbornness for lack of a better word, kept me going, right? And that's a huge milestone because I realized while women came before me, and this isn't to get into a gender discussion or anything, but there were some really strong women that came before me that set the stage so I could actually go out in the workforce and not just be an educator, which was in the 60s pretty much all you could do, right? But they laid that foundation. So I think about that and I think about my role as a woman or a female mentor, right? So I do a lot of female mentoring, and that probably just to get back to your question, was a huge milestone in my life and set the stage for what I think is important personally and professionally as a mentor for other females. Another one was being able to take over a large division of a very large company. And I walked in, and these people had 5 bosses in the last 3 years, and personal conversations with every single one of them. And their thoughts were, "Why should I trust you? I've had 5 bosses in 3 years. What are you bringing to the table?" And leadership isn't just about being accepted and leading. It's about gaining that mutual respect. And in that moment and through those discussions, interviews with my new leadership team, it was such a stark example of be a servant leader, right, through those conversations. And it was so pronounced. That was a huge learning for me and a realization of gaining their respect, empowering them to do more, that realization and further realization of diversity of thought. It was just a very pronounced moment. And then accepting failure. So I had this, I was in sales, and I had this deal I was working on that we had executive leadership. We had all of the checklist of people who said yes. We had gone through the process. We had board approval scheduled, and the deal failed. And it was because that CEO and the board had discussed how it would impact potentially a financial metric that I won't go into because it's not important for them, right? And even though we had proven ROI, it was a personal metric. And you have to learn from every single big failure like that, because that determined if we made our number that quarter, not only my number, but the team's number and the broader company's number. And you have to look at all different avenues and facets and learn from that failure. And there's so many failures that people go through in their lives, and we struggle with those. And we have to get better about accepting that they happen, analyzing why they happened, and being honest about, maybe I missed that question in the sales process. So part of it's on me, and we move on and learn from that experience. I call it putting tools in the sales kit, and you need those tools. And a lot of tools come from failure, not just success.
I'm interested. We're going to come on to talk in a little while in depth as to your responsibilities currently, but clearly you've experienced the UK perspective of business, the UK landscape from a business point of view, and we have this perception as to how failure is accepted in the US, perhaps from a British, this is a broad sweeping generalization for which I can only apologize, but nonetheless, we have this perception that failure is an accepted part of the process in the US, and it's almost embraced. I wouldn't suggest it's encouraged, but it's accepted that there will be challenges, and the learning that you will engage can ultimately really enhance your expertise, your capability, your leadership, whatever, over your chances over a longer period of time. We have an aversion to failure. I don't know if it's uniquely British, but it's certainly something here in the UK that we have an aversion to as part of the kind of national dialogue makeup. Has that been your experience? Is that a familiar thing, do you think? Is that something that you'd seen too? I guess what are the differences that you might have seen between the two?
So I think our whole mantra is, if you fail, fail fast, right? Try to fail fast, get your learnings through, because you still have to go after whatever that goal is, right? I think it is, everyone still struggles with failure. We can say we're better at it in the US. I'm not sure about that. Differences, I think in this company, Navenio, it's a UK company, right? We're launching in the US, and that is why they looked for a US CEO to bring the solution, because the US healthcare market is a very large market. And this solution is an ideal fit because of the ubiquitous nature of this thing right here, right? Cell phones or mobile devices. And it's the basis for our solution. So I think we and this company and this board has been very supportive of the struggles we have realized. So I'm not sure if there's a big difference in the culture about failure or around failure. I think this board and this leadership team has been very focused on figuring out where our failure points are, working together to fix them and moving forward.
Interesting. And so for you, let's go back just a stage. I was going to ask the question inevitably, why Navenio, what the appeal might have been before from your perspective. But before we go into that, tell me a bit about the company. What is it that Navenio does?
Right. Navenio addresses workforce efficiency. Our primary market is healthcare, but this solution can assist with any level of workforce efficiency issue that exists across market sectors. So very simply, it's complexity made simple. If you think about the healthcare market and a patient in the center of that, and all of the services that need to be provided to a patient, there's a multitude. So it's not only the largest workforce in the world, it is one of the most complex around the patient and not around the patient. So safety issues, compliance issues, things like that. And our solution allows a nurse or a non-clinician that identifies a service need to request that need, and infrastructure free. So no beacons, no transmitters required in the health system. It takes the mobile device and Wi-Fi, and it allows you to request, just like Uber. It allows you to request that, and then the service provider, accepts the service request, and that nurse knows exactly when that service provider will hit the bedside. So the nurse can properly orchestrate care. So the nurse can properly prepare the patient. This improves patient experience because it improves nurse to patient communication. It improves collaboration across all of those service providers, clinician or non-clinician. Think patient transport, think allied health professional, PT, OT, ST. So that's physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy coming to the bedside, radiology, either way, bringing them down to radiology or having an ultrasound come to the bedside. It's pastoral care. It's security. If a workplace violence, which workplace violence is number one in health systems right now. So a security response. This solution is the ability to quickly request a service and then prepare for the service, which helps patient throughput, which helps decrease that patient backlog, which is one of the number one issues in healthcare globally, not just in the US or the UK market.
So ultimately, as well, I would imagine dramatically enhancing the patient experience as a consequence. I mean, the improvements are,
Right.
That the quality of care received as a consequence is massively impacted.
One, you're getting through the health system faster because you're coordinating efforts more quickly. Two, that nurse-patient relationship is improved because the nurse can actually communicate more effectively with that patient. We also have the ability with this device and with this solution to locate assets. Think an infusion pump or a wheelchair that the nurse may need. Nurses spend almost 2 hours in their shift every day looking for assets, coordinating events for the patients, etc. Right? So if you can take that 2 hours and pinpoint it and focus it on that patient, think about the improved orchestration of care that can occur.
Is it too simplistic to describe it as the digitization of healthcare? Is that too simplistic a way of looking at it as an overarching phrase as to the world in which you're operating?
I don't think it is, because it is a very complex, patented algorithmic solution that literally a nurse requests, service provider responds, providing the information that's needed to get the right person to the right place as quickly as possible. And it's all through information that allows that to occur. Response times are decreased by 31% on average in the UK using our solution. Task volumes have gone up 94% in some health systems, which helps that backlog and that labor shortage. We have returned on average 27 full-time nurses across our customer base back to the bedside in terms of hours. You can say that's a cost savings, but it isn't, because of the labor shortage of nurses globally, right? So it's more about getting that nurse back to the bedside, allowing him or her to collaborate and work with that patient that's so critically important.
I mean, it sounds such a wonderfully compelling proposition. I could make all sorts of assumptions as to the appeal from your perspective, but ought not to do that. I'd rather ask the question, why? What was the appeal of Navenio for you?
So I've been in healthcare IT, working across many, many different solution sectors. So clinical, analytics, patient throughput, scheduling, but most of my work has been in the supply chain, logistics, patient throughput, and analytic focus. So being able to come full circle with a transformative technology absolutely perked or piqued my interest in Navenio. And that's why we started conversations, because it is complementary to the solutions out there. It is a very non-invasive approach. So many solutions, they will say they have an ROI, or return on investment. And we have validated ROI through our NHS Innovation Award grant. We had to validate those ROIs that I spoke of earlier. But it's very invasive that these other solutions are very invasive, or take more time for the nurse to input data, or take more time for them to install. Our solution can be installed full stack in 9 weeks, and you can start seeing results in the first week. Right? So again, that transformative nature of this technology, and it takes a very little IT or information technology footprint or time to install, because all we need is mobile devices and access to the Wi-Fi. That's how we can do it in 9 weeks. So you've really got to come to healthcare, especially, but any market sector, but healthcare especially, because they have so many solutions, hundreds within their hospital, with a non-invasive, complementary solution. So think about an electronic patient record. They can schedule a service request. They have no idea when that person's arriving. They cannot set algorithmic calculations based on acuity and sequencing and grouping of events and triggering events. So patient is discharged, so it automatically creates a bed clean request, which then automatically creates a patient transport for a new patient up to the bed. That algorithm helps with the optimization of workflow underneath. So it's, again, just that transformative nature that drew me in.
It strikes me you're taking so much of the friction out of the healthcare journey. And that in itself becomes, I mean, it must be hugely attractive, but nonetheless, hugely competitive space, enormous market, which I imagine in itself creates challenges. There's a lot to overcome.
Absolutely. We're a small player in a big
Yeah.
pond, right? So you've got to be very, very clear on the value prop of non-invasive, transformative, gets to that last mile of workforce efficiency to provide any worker in healthcare a release valve. Every single worker in healthcare is stressed right now because of the critical labor shortages against patient ratios, against just service level agreements. If you're a non-clinician providing a service and you need to respond within X period of time. So being able to provide that solution that allows them to more collaboratively work together is critical for a health system. And being able to communicate that and show that and demonstrate that so they actually see that they are getting those release valves is so fun to watch in healthcare because of the mounting pressure.
I think one of the things that strikes me is the scale and pace of innovation around healthcare, which I would imagine, you mentioned your tenure during your working life. I would imagine you've seen all sorts of incredible innovation, and I'd imagine one or two fall by the wayside as well. What excites you about the innovation that you're seeing currently? What are you excited by that you see the change within healthcare?
Yeah. So AI, while scary, is also so exciting if used appropriately and when used appropriately. So think about all the data that these systems are storing and the ability to hypothesize based on that data or that image, right? So think radiology imaging and being able to spot a certain diagnosis based on similar images across healthcare, being able to ascertain through what we call digital twin technology, being able to ascertain and hypothesize where backlogs will occur. That's our next frontier of what Navenio will want to look at, and being able to say, backlogs occurring here. If you do this, this, or this will be the resulting potential actions or results, right? And that is so exciting, being able to take that data and use it for good, use it to help continue to optimize that workflow, that reassignment of labor appropriately and efficiently and effectively.
Yeah, I'd heard a use case only this morning as to the potential of AI around, and it was UK centric, but nonetheless, it talked to the amount of data that the NHS has going back. Arguably, the point was made, and I don't know the validity of this, but the point was made that arguably within the NHS itself as a single body healthcare entity is the longest established globally, and that if you were therefore, so as a consequence of the amount of data that exists within the NHS alone, if you're to able to use AI to interrogate that data and spot trends, or I guess trends is the right way, but you could start to assess. The example was given as to whether there's a correlation between, and they were making daft examples to paint the picture, but is there a correlation between somebody's height at age 10 and at the onset of dementia at age 65, whatever it might be, whatever the correlations might be, but actually the amount of data that's sat there, when we can start to interrogate it at speed with great intelligence, that becomes so powerful. So I would imagine being at the forefront of, and also as you will be experiencing some of the conversations that clinicians and healthcare, those that are at the sharp end of healthcare in delivery, what the challenges that they're experiencing and how some of these issues can be solved through technology. That in itself must be really exciting to be seeing some of that and being at the forefront of it.
I see so many exciting companies that are coming up and coming of age through this AI technology that have a really positive outcome regarding disease diagnoses, particularly a male at this age will have onset of this because of these preconditions or non-clinically. How do you optimize the workforce, optimize revenue cycle by addressing certain market segments? There's just so many amazing companies coming up, and we need the ability to test and prove our concepts in order to move forward. So exciting time, scary time, because small companies are struggling in healthcare because there's so many backlog items that IT organizations in healthcare are working on. We just came out of COVID. There's labor shortages. What bubbles to the top, right?
Yeah, interesting times. I think, though, that do you see a shift or as we see a shift towards more preventative approaches to healthcare, that technology starts to inform a lot of the decision making around that, and some of these that actually ultimately we could drive even more efficiencies. Navenio's at the forefront of that, but even more efficiencies within the space as we adopt a more preventative outlook, driven by data, I guess.
Absolutely. At a previous company I worked at, we targeted some of the top most expensive disease states, diabetes, heart condition, et cetera, and started putting programs in place with employers to address the health of younger individuals. And the payoff for those employers in the states, because the employers pay a good portion of the health benefits for their employees, and for the payers and for the individual. There is a win-win across all of those sectors. And then the fourth sector, healthcare, there's not as many inpatients, there's not as many comorbidities. So as I see us addressing the positive health aspects, this will create wonderful results for our health systems, as individuals, as across the board.
One of the things that I'm also interested in is to understand how your approach to leadership and your leadership style perhaps has evolved as a consequence of the world of work in which we now find ourselves. You know, you're CEO of, and as I understand it, tasked with US expansion, but with a business that is UK domiciled. It's a UK business, UK founder. And I see so many organizations now wrestling with this. What is work? Given that historically, and for certainly your working life, my working life, it was a place that we went to do things. Whereas increasingly, that place we went to becomes ever more virtual. And how that therefore informs, as a CEO, a leadership style, given that you've got multi-jurisdiction under your charge. How has your leadership style evolved, do you think, as a consequence of the world in which we now find ourselves?
Yeah, it's back to what we spoke about a little bit earlier, and it's understanding the individual and not wanting everyone like you, right? And I always believed, and have always believed, 95% of all problems in a company are around communication, right? So it's that active communication. Luckily, at one of the large companies I worked with, I ran a division that had over 400 people, either directly or indirectly, reporting into that and supporting that division. And they were across probably 10 locations and then individual households. So I had to actively change my communication style because it was a remote workforce, right? I did travel a great deal to those that were in an office, but I was in Chicago, office of one, running and leading these other 400 plus individuals. So your communication style has to be very individual. Then it has to come together and bring those individual people together as a group, and then lead through education. I am a very transparent leader, and I teach and I inform. So they understand different areas of the business, almost trying to get them to walk in the shoes. So, for example, engineering, understanding service professionals understanding the operational side of the business, the operations understanding, and all of them understanding how we need to make decisions as leaders, giving a little more glimpse into that, not burdening them with all of the questions and concerns that come up as a leader or as a leadership team, but informing and educating them. So as they approach their other teammates, and that means teammates inside their development team, for example, but outside of that and across the organization, services, operations, sales, and the complexity of each of those areas and how they're run. It helps bring the team together. So I have one-on-ones, I'll have fireside chats with our team members and just let them ask questions. I'll have formal presentations about education on the market and where we need to go. It'll differ depending upon where we're at, how sales are going. It'll differ, but it's important. Education is critically important. Plus, I charge myself as a leader with creating resumes. I don't believe everyone will stay at Navenio. I don't want them to if they have a career opportunity that builds on that resume. And it's one of my most important jobs is to build those resumes as well.
I think that's a wonderful outlook. I'm reflecting on my own experience of having worked for someone who did exactly that, and how empowering and how exciting I found that as an employee. It was he was the best boss I'd ever had, and certainly that was his principle. So, I know from my own experience the value that can inform to your people. As you reflect back, what advice might you give Connie, your 21-year-old self?
Be more flexible sooner. Accept failure, because I came from a very strong upbringing where failure wasn't as forgiving as I am now about failure. Take everything in stride. It's not that people are all racist or have different thoughts or are sexist or are, it's usually just fear of the unknown. And don't get so upset by it, because it's just taking a step back and looking at their perspective and trying to bring them and myself along on a journey of getting to know one another, right? As opposed to, there's this subconscious bias that plays in all of us, right? And I allowed that. I would tell my 21-year-old self, just be aware, so much more aware of that, right? Than you are. So you can be more open, more educational, a better leader. You can accept failure faster, right? Is what I would probably tell my 21-year-old self.
What about away from the workplace? What are your passions and hobbies, and how have they enriched your life?
So I have got to say, my biggest passion right now are my 4 grandbabies. I have 4 wonderfully beautiful grandbabies, and I love dancing with them, and I love watching their little characters grow and be amazed, and being there to be able to be the sage advisor and not the parent. And so that is one of my biggest hobbies. And 2 of them live near me and 2 of them live far away, and I miss them terribly every day. But others, I run. I run because it helps self-reflection. I run because when you have an anxious day, it allows you to just knock that all out of you, right? Because you get to the point of exhaustion. Mine occurs, my tightness starts to ebb away as I get to only about a mile and 3/4. It doesn't even take that long anymore. And that allows you to be calming and much more self-reflective. I like giving back to the community. So I am on, and I'm very passionate about secondary education or post high school. So as a first generation college graduate in my family, it's very important for me to pay it forward because I am very blessed and I am the vice chair on my undergraduate board of trustees because then it allows me to pay that forward. And I'm very focused and committed to that college. So those are some of the things I do on an off time basis. And then traveling with my husband. He's retired. I'm not, but we love to travel. I've actually gotten him hiking. I see him being able to do that and enjoy it and be out in nature. So,
How do you define success?
you know, success is, are you happy at the end of the day? Are you doing something you love? Remember, this doesn't define you. It's one aspect. Take it seriously, work with those individuals, because as I see individuals either grow within the company or leave the company grow, that's success for me in the workplace. And then success is meeting those metrics, but it isn't all defining, right? You've got to meet them, you've got to exceed them. And I'm very focused on those, but it's one aspect of your life.
Have you, and we've touched on some of these, I feel, through our conversation, but nonetheless, I'm interested if you might summarize them. Do you have a guiding life philosophy or perhaps a set of principles that you live by?
So never ask anyone to do anything you wouldn't do. Be fair, be kind, be inquisitive. As a leader, be definitive after the debate is done because it shows strength in conviction. But bring everyone along.
And what, therefore, as to the future, your dreams and aspirations for that future, how would you describe them? What are those dreams and aspirations?
To see Navenio grow and become a successful company from a business perspective, because it does provide great value to not only healthcare, but to potentially other markets. In my personal life, to see my grandbabies get old and to be able to be part of their life in a meaningful way, to see my children exist through parenting and the send off into and survive and succeed and find great joy in the love of parenting, which my children that do have kids are wonderful parents. And then afterwards, as I settle into retirement, because settle isn't a word I use very often in my life, I will probably try to continue to mentor or help young companies look towards the future or individuals and mentoring them on where they want to go. That brings me great joy. I will probably stay on the board for a long period of time at my undergraduate because first generation, which 49% of the students that go to Ripon College are first generation students. Being able to mentor them is critically important for me.
Connie, that's been wonderful. Thank you. It's an incredible journey that you've been on and that you continue to enjoy. And I think inevitably I'd have asked questions as to legacy. I think what greater legacy, you've alluded to it without me asking the specific question around children and grandchildren and the work that you're doing with Navenio and how that's impacting healthcare. That these are all things leaving wonderful legacies in themselves. But I also think, to your point, the role you're doing with your college. I mean, that in itself, I'd always ask the question as to how you're impacting others, and there's great evidence around that. You've done some wonderful things. So continue success with Navenio. It's a wonderful offer you guys have, and we look forward to continuing to watch you flourish and enjoy great success. But I really appreciate you taking the time out this afternoon. And I think importantly, we should point listeners in the direction of where they could go to find out more. Where should we send them if they're interested to understand more about you or indeed more about Navenio?
Wonderful. Navenio.com, Navenio.com. And there's a way to submit a request for more information.
Fantastic. Connie, thank you. I really appreciate your time. It's been great to have you here as my guest today, and my very best wishes for the future for you.
Thank you very much for your time as well, Lee. It's been wonderful.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to today's Extrology podcast. I really appreciate your audience and ears. If you've enjoyed it, then why not hop onto iTunes and give us a review? I'd really appreciate anything that you might have to say. Any feedback always gratefully received, and look forward to hosting you next time. See you soon. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.